The JFK Files have been released. The media is trying to say, nothing there, nothing there. You know, you don't need to pay attention to this. It's just a nothing burger. I was looking at the headlines coming out of the New York Times last night, and they were sort of saying the same kind of thing. And it's like, guys, how can you say that you haven't read through all of it? It is going to take time. At 7 p.m. last night, we got 32,000 pages. 10:30 p.m., there was another drop of 31,400 pages. And what are we getting today? More. Okay, more. And Donald Trump has promised they're not going to overanalyze this. They're not actually going to spoon feed the talking points to the reporters. People are actually going to have to do their job, but they can, because you know what? Every citizen in the world right now has access to this stuff. Think about that. Think about how amazing this is. They're all in the National Archives. He promised this would happen. Indeed, it did.
Have you seen what's in the files? Have you read them?
I've heard about them.
Was there,
Anything interesting?
It's going to be very interesting.
was there an executive summary supplied to you, Mr. President?
No, I'm not doing summaries. You'll write your own summaries. It's many pages. Is it 80,000 pages? Approximately 80,000 pages. So it's a lot of stuff. And you'll make your own determination.
And that's the way it should be. Honestly, that's what's changed. And in making our own determination, I think we found some very interesting elements. Good to have you guys all here. Spirit-filled. Great to see you back on the show. Appreciate your generosity. Yes, we have a lot of information to get through today. This is massive. This is just a huge dump, and I've been up all night reading, and I'm not going to get through it, of course, all of it, but there's one page in particular I do want to get to. More on that in a moment, but first, just how amazing this is. Tulsi Gabbard tweeting out today, President Trump is ushering in a new era of maximum transparency. Today, per his direction, previously redacted JFK assassination files are now being released to the public with no redactions. Promises made, promises kept. Go to archives.gov, JFK. Wow. I mean, so here's the page. Here's the page that matters, you guys. This is what you want to pay attention to. And it has a little something to do with a gentleman by the name of Gary Underhill, who was saying to some of his friends, very close friends, that he knew this was going to happen. So first of all, let's back up for a second. And then, by the way, he was found dead in his apartment like 6 months later, and it was allegedly a suicide, a bunch of shots to the back of the head. So that doesn't really add up. And we've got some new information related to who Gary Underhill was connected with that I want to walk you through. But let's just go back for a moment. This has been previously reported out a little bit before. Here, for example, you're seeing a Newsweek report on Gary Underhill. People have talked about him. What's new, I'm going to get to in this section, is that he had some acquaintances that were concerning. I mean, concerning, especially now, given what has come out about them. But anyway, Gary Underhill, his full name was John Garrett Underhill. He had worked in military intelligence during World War II before becoming one of the CIA's sort of people, although he was not really one of the people, right? So he was one of the unpeople, meaning that he performed, per the release memo, special assignments for the agency. And he also, interestingly, worked as a photojournalist for Life magazine between 1938 and 1942. That's actually going to be important a little bit later in the program, because I want to share with you some perspective on how that working as a photojournalist, et cetera, may have then influenced some of the other things that were happening during the 1960s, et cetera. But this is Gary Underhill, okay? And the reason he's kind of importance right here is because he was on intimate terms with a number of high-ranking CIA officials. And he's the guy who basically attributed Kennedy's death to a CIA clique, which was carrying on a lucrative racket in gun running, narcotics, and other contraband, and manipulating political intrigue to serve its own ends, according to the memo. So basically what this is suggesting is somehow the CIA may have been running some kind of op that was making the mafia, blush. Here's the memo. Okay, so this is the one that I think is really just interesting to focus in on. According to this, the day after the assassination, Gary Underhill left Washington in a hurry, Late in the evening, he showed up at the home of friends in New Jersey. He was very agitated. A small clique within the CIA was responsible for the assassination, he confided to these friends in New Jersey, and he was afraid for his life and probably would have to leave the country. Less than 6 months later, Underhill was found shot to death in his Washington apartment. The coroner ruled it a suicide. J. Garrett Underhill had been an intelligence agent, as I just explained to you, during World War II and was a recognized authority on limited warfare and small arms. A researcher and writer on military affairs, he was on a first-name basis with many of the top brass in the Pentagon. He was also on intimate terms with a number of high-ranking CIA officials. He was one of the agency's people, this is something that has been reported out before, who performed special assignments. At one time, he had been a friend of Samuel Cummings. Remember that name, you guys, Samuel Cummings, of Inter-Armco, the arms broker that numbers among its customers the CIA and ironically Klein Sporting Goods of Chicago, from whence the mail order Carenco allegedly was purchased by Oswald. Okay, why is Cummings now a name I said you need to remember? This is connected back to Gary, and what has come out now and what we're learning is that Samuel George Cummings operated that weapon company, Interarms, which Underhill believed was somehow associated with the murder. So he was saying that this was going to happen and the CIA was going to do it, and he thought that Interarms, which he had worked with, was actually going to be the company that did it. Well, Cummings actually was well known, right, at the time for operating this Interarms and Inter-Armco, arm dealerships that supplied the CIA with weapons. However, now this memo is telling us something new. The Interarms and Inter-Armco were initially owned by the CIA, which hired Cummings as a chief agent before he took over those companies. So again, now it's getting at maybe there was some kind of weapons gang going on, and maybe this weapons gang, which had been found out by JFK, was going to be exposed, and they wanted to prevent that. That's one of the theories. We're going to talk about some others, okay? Because, I just got to say, it's going to be a lot of reading and it's going to take time, but these are some of the biggies, and this is what I want to highlight, because there's no way you should ever be saying that this is a nothing burger. This is massive. And if nothing else, what it's going to tell us is that sometimes the cover-up, not that it could be worse than the crime, but it certainly led to a lot of speculation, a lot of distrust in the government for the last 60 some odd years, right? Because they weren't willing to say the truth. The same exact thing happened with COVID. Oh, it never came from that wet lab. It never came from the lab in Wuhan, China. And they sat there with a straight face and tried to perpetuate that narrative. And you had everyone up until recently, saying exactly that it somehow came from this wet market, which made no sense. We knew they were doing the research on that particular virus in Wuhan, China. And by the way, we were funding it via these many tentacles and arms, USAID and all these other things, right, that we use, and NGOs. We're going to get to all of that because this is coming out. This is getting exposed. And so we covered something up. Maybe we covered up that we had a hand in it. Maybe we covered up that we knew Lee Harvey Oswald was a person of interest. We knew he had gone down to Mexico City. We knew he'd spent time in Russia. We knew he was married to a Soviet. We knew all of this stuff. We knew that he was effectively an enemy of capitalism and an enemy of the United States. And yet we sat on it and did nothing. And maybe they were trying to cover up that. More on that in a moment. But again, back to Cummings. Here, this memo states that the CIA did actually own this Interarms before Cummings came into it and bought it in 1958. So the question is, was he somehow related to this assassination? Again, going back to the really important memo, this is what Gary Underhill believed, and this is what he was telling his friends. And so how is it that the guy winds up with some 12 shots to the head, right? And it's declared a suicide 6 months later? That's a really serious question that we need answers to. And, maybe they are in these files, but I just got to say that sometimes when you try and cover things up like this for 60 some odd years, you wind up with more problems. And I go back to the example of Wuhan, China. I go back to Anthony Fauci. I go back to the fact that I knew in February of 2020, through good sources connected to the State Department and China, etc., that there was a lab in Wuhan, China, that it was believed this thing was released from. And they didn't think it was deliberate, but it was some kind of mistake. And then you weren't allowed to talk about it. And then one day a reporter, I think it was a Fox News reporter, maybe in May of 2020, asked President Trump that. And he said, yes, I've seen some intelligence alluding to that. And the media went bonkers. Absolutely, positively bonkers, because you see, the media was basically one in one with Deep State, the CIA, the FBI, God knows it's USAID. They were getting money over it. For goodness sakes, the New York Times, nearly $30 million. And they suddenly just attacked him and attacked that narrative, and it got totally shut down. So when you think about that, when you think about even the reality that we knew that Matthew Crooks in Butler, Pennsylvania was clearly an issue, and people were talking about it. Heck, you get people in the crowd that were pointing up at the guy on the roof, right? And nobody was moving, nobody was doing anything. Maybe it was just pure incompetence. Maybe these people just completely suck at their jobs, and they are trying to cover up for that after the fact, or maybe there's something else. You understand why people are left, when you cover things up, asking questions, right? Because they couldn't access his social media records, etc. That all got shut down, the body immediately cremated, etc., etc. And so there's some hallmarks there, whether you're looking at Wuhan, whether you're looking at the assassination attempt on President Trump, or whether you're looking at the JFK assassination files, that cause you to ask more questions. And it sometimes, as I say, the cover-up, certainly in the case of the Wuhan virus, the cover-up was sort of worse, right? Like if they had just admitted the truth from the beginning and allowed everybody to report it out, but they wouldn't even allow you to talk about it. And that's an issue. Like that is, and so it's the same kind of thing that we're seeing right here. And what I want to get to, guys, is actually something really important, because the CIA has been doing this for years, and it got worse beginning in 2012. You see, they've had sort of the leeway, the financial ability to do all this all over the world since 1948. And then in 2012, Obama turned this psyop, if you would, right, the information stream on us here in the United States. And so that I find incredibly troubling, and getting back to this idea that maybe sometimes the cover-up is actually the real problem, right? That's the issue that we need to be worried about, whether it be Butler, Pennsylvania, and we're left with a ton of questions because they won't give us any information, whether it be Wuhan, China, again, we don't have the information, or heck, whether it's Hunter Biden's laptop and they're sitting there saying, no, it's hardly Hunter, it's just the Russians and it's Rudy Giuliani, like their fault. No, it actually was Hunter Biden's laptop, which was being investigated by the FBI. So you gotta wonder, I mean, what was it that they were worried about back then? Maybe they were worried that if in fact it was the Cubans, we should have known that, right? Because we did have a ton of intelligence on Lee Harvey Oswald. We knew that he had gone to Mexico City looking for a visa for Cuba. We knew there's a ton of stuff that we knew. We knew he had spent time in the USSR. We knew that he actually had connections and actually trained as like an armsman over there. We knew a lot. And yet somehow this still happened. So is this an effort to cover up because our team looks like idiots? Or is it that maybe we knew this was coming and we just didn't do anything about it? So once again, we look like idiots. Maybe there was a desire to see this happen because of Samuel Cummings and what Gary Underhill were talking about. there's a lot of questions there. And were they worried that this was going to be World War III? If they came out and they told the public, actually the Cubans are responsible for this and we missed it, or the Russians are responsible for this and we missed it, did they think that we were going to have World War III on our hands? It again reminds me of the Wuhan, China situation. Like, why couldn't you say that China screwed up, that it was the responsibility of the lab? It wasn't until November of 2020 when the Wall Street Journal reported out what so many of us were already hearing, but you couldn't get out there at the time, right? You would just get immediately shut down, that there had been some people that had fallen ill in November, December of 2019 in Wuhan, China, that had worked at the lab. That was all information that should have been fed to the public immediately. And then finally the Wall Street Journal comes out with it, and Biden sort of had nowhere to hide. And then eventually you had this commission, and eventually the Department of Energy came out and said, oh yeah, it came from Wuhan, China. And then you had the State Department coming out saying, yeah, it came from Wuhan, China. Not the CIA, though. CIA held on for dear life. It wasn't until just recently that the CIA admitted, it came from Wuhan, China. So why is that? Why? Why were they trying to run some psych op on us? Well, this is what they've done, right? This is what they've done for years. And it started not just with what happened. It had already been in effect effectively since the 1940s. I have so much to bring you on this. This is a huge day. I didn't get a lot of sleep. I'm doing a lot of reading. I'm sure you are too. And this is the way it needs to be, right? We actually have to be able to look at everything with clear eyes and be able to know stuff. Quick shout out for one of our sponsors who help bring this show to you every single day for free. And you know how much I like gold. Just go to trishlovesgold.com. You'll find out. Anyway, trishlovesgold.com, because you get up to $15,000 in free silver with my code, or just the fact that you're there at trishlovesgold.com. Or you can text my name, Trish, to 65532 right now. Call them at 1-844-495-1115. Again, gold is one of those things to kind of have in really difficult times when you're not sure about inflation, you're not sure about the sort of overall trajectory of the world. I actually feel better, but yet simultaneously I am a little bit nervous.